Hey everyone, let's learn about some fish. So our first one should be pretty easy. We've got the American brook lamprey, and nothing else on our list looks like it because it doesn't have a jaw. That's something that's pretty easy. It's got a circular mouth, if you remember. Other things, it's got a single nostril, and instead of having gill slits, it has gill pores. So, and it doesn't have just four or five like all the other fish, it's got seven. So there should be no confusion with trying to figure out where this guy belongs. American brook lamprey. Let's see if we can get through it. As you remember, it spends most of its life as a larva, and when it converts to being an adult, it doesn't eat because it lacks an intestine entirely, which is pretty strange. So lethenteron basically means missing a gut. Okay, so that's where the scientific name comes from. As I mentioned, I would also accept Lampetra, okay, as the genus as well. Okay, this one is not really found in Virginia, well, in our part of Virginia, but it is in a couple of places, just not very common, and it's a stream fish like brooks. Okay, our gars, this is our representative gar. It's another one that's not in our area in Southwest Virginia, in the New River Valley, anything like that. This is the long-nosed gar. The closest I think it comes is coastal Virginia, but it's nice to have a gar representing, and they just look like nothing else that is on our list either. If you imagine a very long pencil with a an alligator face. There are a couple other species of gar, like the alligator gar, that has even more of an alligator face. But I don't think that you can find anything that is at all like this. They have weird scales too, called ganoid scales, which make it stand out a little bit more. Obviously, their tail is very strange, but I just kind of describe it as a pencil with a really, really long snout and teeth that could kill you in your sleep. We only have an example from the genus. We don't have the example of a long-nosed gar, so there's extra credit if anybody can get one for me. So if I show you anything, I might say, I might give you the picture and say what species is this, or maybe which one of these is in the order for gar. Okay. Oh, that's Lepizosteus osseus. Remember, they both have to do with bone because the ganoid scales look very bony when you are trying to describe them, apparently. Our bowfin is our next one, and I think we've talked about this in class a bit. The bowfin is very primitive, been around for a very long time. It has that single long dorsal fin, and the thing that really stands out, even in preserved specimens, is that spot on the base of its tail. All right. It also does have the streaks going through its face. There's only, I think, 3 species on our list that have those horizontal stripes. But obviously, this is the only one with the big spot on its tail, continuous dorsal fin, and very rounded back fin as well. Right. So that's Amia calva. And yeah, that should be probably enough to identify where it is. It's probably in the New River, but it can handle very, very low oxygen conditions, and it can even get through drought and stuff like that. So it's pretty neat. I would like to see one in life sometime. Our gizzard shad, this is the one where our specimens are not great. So I think I promise that if I ask you this, it will be from the picture because the specimens haven't preserved that very diagnostic black spot just behind the gills. I haven't seen that very well on the specimen, as well as that elongated dorsal fin, that one spine that goes far back. It's kind of hard to see on our specimens, so we'll just stick with that. The gizzard shad are going to be quite large. They fit into our gallon jars, but I mean, they're going to be pretty big, and they have been stocked in a couple places around here. I would love to get some for extra credit so we'd have some good specimens for once. But on the picture, look for the black spot, look for the really weird spike-like little dorsal scale there that really makes it stand out. Otherwise, it's just shiny and large. Okay. This is a lake fish, so I think it has been stocked in Claytor Lake. At least it used to be stocked there. I'm not sure if it still is existing there, but they can be more than a foot long. That's why they're pretty big. I don't know how they are about good eating, but anyway, enough things for you to learn about, and that's Derosima sapediana. Our white sucker is the first one we'll be talking about with a terminal or inferior mouth facing downwards. Okay. Terminal or inferior means mouth facing downwards. This one is probably our least remarkable species because it doesn't have spots, it doesn't have saddles, it doesn't have anything that really makes it stand out besides just being big. All right. We have caught these in our turtle traps before, and they can easily go like a foot long sandwich, essentially. And they've got the turn down inferior U-shaped mouth. Sometimes they have little dots along their mouth, but otherwise, they don't really have many things that help it stand out. They lack barbels. All right. Sometimes you can see in the picture below, the scales start out small towards the head, and the scales end up looking bigger, and actually they are bigger towards the tail. That's another diagnostic. I haven't checked to see if that was obvious in our preserved specimens, but if it's lacking in any really blotching or color pattern and it's got a downturned mouth, you got yourself a white sucker. All right. We have found this in the Little River, so therefore it's there. In the New River, it's a bottom feeder, obviously, and yeah, it's also known as a mullet. Okay, so that's Catostomus commersonii. We've got our northern hogsucker. This is another one with the inferior mouth, but this one has some coloration to it. It generally is much smaller than that other sucker that we just saw, and it's got saddles, black saddles, generally 1, 2, 3, 4, generally 5-ish black saddles. So it's got that mottling to it that is pretty obvious even in preserved specimens. So look for downturned mouth, 5 saddles. You've got yourself northern hogsucker. I'm trying to move this out of the way. And that is actually, the saddles are part of its scientific name, Hypentellum nigricans. So the nigra means black, so that's in reference to the saddles. Okay. And it does have bumps on its lips too. A lot of the ones with terminal mouths seem to have that. Okay. But really, they tend to be like 6 inches, 8 inches at most. They don't really get much bigger than that, at least for the specimens I've ever seen. And just look for the saddles. Let's see. Next up is our central stone roller. They also have a somewhat downturned mouth. They are smaller relative to the other two that we've seen so far. What's unique about them is when they are in breeding condition, they will have all those tubercles, at least the males will have that both on their nose, continuing onto their head, and even a little farther back, as you can see. And also when they're in breeding coloration, they have all these dark black bands going through some of their fins. And you can see the bands in 2 of the pictures, at least. You've got the dark back horizontal bands going through a couple of them. They're not going to be as big as the other groups. Their head doesn't look really as malformed as, say, the hogsucker. I find that thing is just weirdly malformed, and big bug eyes is the way I see him. The white sucker, when you see it in real life, also kind of looks like it's, I don't know, what is that? What was Spuds MacKenzie, the American Staffordshire Terrier, or was it a Bull Terrier? Something with just a continuous nose going down. Anyway, they just look a little weird to me, the 2 suckers. But the stone roller, although it has a slightly downturned mouth and it's got thicker lips, a lot of times it just kind of looks like a normal fish to me. But look for the banding, look for the tubercles. I think our sample that I have definitely shows both those things. I made a point to find one. And then it's got some black speckling throughout its body. That also helped it to stand out. It's not a saddle, it's not solid, it's speckled throughout the body. Okay, so that kind of differentiates it from the previous ones we've already talked about. Not a solid pattern, but just speckles. Okay. So here's the information about it. It's Campostoma anomalum, all right? And it's, like I said, it's a little smaller than everything else. Look for the mottled appearance with the dark scales. And then, like I said, it's kind of a downward facing mouth, but they actually call it subterminal. So instead of facing straight down, it's kind of angled like this. All right. So you've got terminal where it just ends like this. Subterminal is slightly facing down, and inferior is facing all the way down. Does that help? Okay. A lot of the suckers are fully inferior, but we're starting to move to the terminal critters here. Okay. So I think we've talked about everything else here. This is a creek fish. This is a river fish that you'll see. Common carp, this is a one that was introduced. It is related to our goldfish, but it also is unique because it's got the cycloid scales. Remember the circular scales if they were to be removed. It's got a couple other things, kind of a downward facing mouth, but not fully again. But what's unique about that is it's just got 2 barbels. All right, instead of the 8, there are 2 and they are small. All right, and you can see that in the picture below. It's pretty obvious. So it's the one with barbels that has just a few of them and has a forked tail and has scales that are very big, very shiny, very circular, overlapping circles. Those are cycloid scales. And sometimes that dorsal fin has some spines to it. So it would actually hurt you if you kind of poked on it. So if you look at our actual specimens, don't poke on it. It would hurt if that helps. Okay. And then it's a solid color. There's no really obvious modeling that I can see, spotting or anything like that. Okay. So again, not native. They're bottom feeders that can be very large. I already talked about the spine that's on the dorsal fin that can be a little bit painful, and then just 2 barbels, just 2. White shiner is a boring little dude. If it is a tiny little minnow-like critter with 0 things to talk about, you've got yourself a white shiner because it is simply white. Okay. Some of the specimens may have a little marking to them, but as far as we're concerned, just look for the one. It's Luxillus alveolus, and it basically is supposed to be shiny and white. That's it. If you see something small with nothing remarkable about it, you have got yourself a white shiner. It's always going to be small. Okay, all the samples that we have are like 2 inches long. Sometimes they can get a little bit bigger, but really not much else going on. It says it's got weak crescents on the side of its body. You can sort of see that, like little darker crescents, but really this one should be pretty straightforward because every other little guy has some sort of coloring, modeling, or uniquely shaped tail or something about it. This one is sort of your default little tiny minnow / shiner bait fish. Okay, Luxillus alveolus, white and shiny. This one obviously has a lot of color to it. We've talked about the mountain red-bellied dace, how it's got, even in preservation, those real dark streaks going through it. And even that red shine still shows up, not necessarily as red, but at least darker morphs that are really obvious. So nothing else looks like this. It really is kind of pretty. Even when it's dead, it's awfully pretty. And this is a stream fish as well. Okay, so this one I think stands out on its own. It should not be very hard. It's supposed to be here. I've never seen them before, but they stay pretty small, 2 to 3 inches at most. When they are in breeding condition, the males are supposed to have little tubercles, little bumps and stuff, but there are so many other features that really make this stand out, just its pattern of colors, that I think this should be an easy one for you. Chrosomus aureus. Okay, remember chroma means color, so should be not too bad for you. Okay. Creek chub is another semi-boring one. The only one you might get it confused with might be a shiner, but these guys are much bigger than the shiners, and they always have dots on their fins. You can see 2 places where there are dots. One is the base of its dorsal fin, and then there's a lighter dot usually at the base of its tail. Okay, so 2 places where you're going to find dots on that creek chub. Okay, sometimes it's got a little bit of a line, a horizontal line going through the center of it, and they do have some little tubercles sometimes when they are in breeding condition. Creek chubs are going to be maybe about the size of my hand. Okay, maybe a little bit bigger than that, but they just look for those dots, and I think that would be helpful enough to figure it out. And that's Semotilus atromaculatus. So the atromaculatus refers to those spots that I was talking about. Okay. It says I may have barbs on my face and head. I have not seen any that have those, but it's possible. It's really hard to see on any of these things unless you're calling these little things here barbs, which look pretty different from barbels or from tubercles. Okay, so just look for the elongated fish that's about 6 inches long that has a spot on the base of its dorsal fin. You got yourself a creek chub. Okay, so there we go. Channel cats, it's another one with the barbels. And obviously this one should stand out pretty well because it's got 8 of them and they're extremely long. And remember, what makes them different from other catfish is they've got spots all over them. Okay, and that's actually part of their scientific name, is having the catfish with spots all over it and having huge barbels coming off of it. And then it's also got a forked tail. So some of our other barbled animals have rounded tails. We'll talk about that with the margin mad tom, okay, which will also have some barbels to it. But this one has a forked tail, spots on its body, super long barbels. Okay, so 3 things there. This is one that's going to be both in lakes and reservoirs and the New River. It's here. We're not sure if it's been introduced or not. I won't ask you about that. But it is a farmed fish, and let's see. Yeah, it can grow up to 2 feet long. So that's pretty impressive. Okay. And that's Ictalurus punctatus. Punctatus meaning punctated or spotted. Okay. Here's our last one with barbels. That is the margin mad tom. These guys are tiny. Okay, so if you're looking at animals with barbels, remember you've got the catfish, you've got the carp with fewer barbels, and you've got this guy with the rounded tail and just a smaller body form. Okay, so look at how far that tail fin, the caudal fin, goes up to and around and encompassing the body. Okay, margin mad toms look pretty different in my world. It's elongated, it's got that crazy wraparound fin, and it's got barbels. Okay, those are the 3 things that you can look for. Okay, that's Notoris insignis. Okay, remember Notoris was in reference to wrapping around the spine essentially, and insignis meant it was remarkable. Okay, apparently some of its spines can be venomous. I've picked them up before, although they've been dead, but you know, not too bad. Okay, so I think we've got enough features about this one, and it's a native stream fish. Northern pike, amazing to catch. The last time I went fishing, I got one of these things, and boy, it was a big boy. It was over 2 feet long. They can get up to 4 feet long. Some of these pike, they are highly desirable fish for sport fishermen, and they look like they've got a duck bill. And that's true for all members of this genus, which is Esox. Okay, so look for the duckbill. I actually, because I didn't think this picture did it justice very well, I found a picture online just for this zoom. So you can make sure that you check it's got that rounded duckbill. All right, that's what you're looking for, even in our specimens that are not northern pike. We have Esox in a jar. I think there may be redfin or chain pickerel. Pretty sure I put the redfins out. But they all have that rounded duck face bill. And that's what really makes them stand out. That's Esox. We've got Esox lucius, which is the northern pike. They're going to be in big reservoirs, big lakes. And like I said, they're a top predator, and they can be up to like almost 4 feet long. They are not native here. All right. So because people like to fish for them, they have been stocked. Okay. Sharp teeth too, by the way. Boy, there's something else. We get to our trout. I think we've covered this quite well in class, where we broke down how to differentiate between the 3 trout. The first one is our rainbow trout. You're always looking for that pink line going down the body along the lateral sides. And also you're looking for spots on the tail. Okay, pink line, spots on the tail is some of the ways to figure it out. And that shows up even in our specimens that are preserved. You can actually see still a glint of the pink. It hasn't been lost in our specimen, even though it's been sitting in ethanol for probably a decade now. I think a student collected that one for me. But obviously it's not native to here. It's native to the Western United States, but it's been stocked everywhere here. It doesn't need to be stocked anymore, I don't think, because it's self-reproducing, and it is a top predator, okay, generally. And we talked about how it's got that kype, and the males will have a very distinct kype, K-Y-P-E, that kind of allows the jaw to jut out a little bit more when they are in breeding condition. And it's supposed to be used for fighting, so they can bite down on other males. Anyway, but that's present in a couple species of trout that can do that. And these guys can get big. You know, a foot is not uncommon. And I think that's the one that it's about a foot long is the one that we have in our collection as well. Okay, so they're top predators, carnivores as adults. The brown trout, as we mentioned, has spots as well, but in our populations of brown trout, they do not extend to the tail. If you go further north in the brown trout geographic range, some of them there have spotted tails, but ours in Virginia are not supposed to, right? They also lack that horizontal pinkish kind of sheen going down the side. So these are kind of boring of all of the 3 trout species. It's the one I think that's sort of least remarkable. It doesn't have the shiny pink line going down. It's just light with dark spots. Okay, so light with dark spots, about the same size. This one is also introduced, so it's Eurasian, and it has been stocked here as well. And they are generally one of the top predators, and they're carnivores as well. And they can also get the kype, and they can also be over 12 inches long. Okay, so just look for the spots, light body, dark spots, nothing on the tail, versus light body, dark spots, a line going down it, and dots on the tail. And then finally, our brook trout is our one native species, which is dark body, light spots. All right, none of the other ones, neither of the other ones has the light spots. Okay, these also tend to be a little smaller too, brookies, and they also tend to be in smaller streams as well. Okay, so cold streams, mountain streams, headwaters, they are native to here. okay, occasionally stocked, but they don't get as big as the other trout, so there's less demand for them. And from what I understand, I think they actually get outcompeted by some of the other trout. We had somebody who was from North Carolina who came to give a talk about trout to our Wildlife Society last year. And I remember if some of these trout overlap, the brook trout tend to get outcompeted. Okay, but they also, like all the other trout, can have a kype, but they don't get nearly as big as the other two. Okay, so look for dark body light spots. All right, moving back to the little guys. So we're at sculpins, where these guys are only, I don't know, 3-4 inches or so, maybe about yay long. They are bottom feeders, and what makes them stand out is they have a big head and a little body. Okay, imagine like their head does not fit on the rest of their body. By the time you get to the tail end of the body, it's real tapered and there's not much to go there. They also have big Dumbo pectoral fins. You can see they're big and they're rounded. Okay, so their pecs, their pectoral fins are big and rounded. All right, and sometimes they're flattened too. So instead of being like this, they're like this because these are bottom feeders. So they're basically kind of moving around, shuffling up and moving the sediment around to feed on it. Okay. So this one I think stands out just because it's small, big head, little body, huge pecs. Okay. It's named Cottus bairdii. Okay. So, which is fish named after the dude named Baird. So not very useful to you. It is native to the New River, so we can find them here. We have caught them in Wildwood at Connolly's Run. And just look for those big fins, those big pectoral fins. None of the other fish we look at on this list have those. Easy enough. All right, we start to get into the bass and the bluegill and the other bass. And let me do you a little drawing here just to kind of show you body shape relative to each other. And you know my drawing is bad. So if this is the height and length of a largemouth bass and a smallmouth bass, the rock bass is a little bit taller. Am I doing that well enough? Okay, so it's not as aerodynamic as the largemouth and smallmouth, so it's a little taller. And then when we get to all of the bluegill and ones that are related to that, it's really wide-bodied. So we go from elongated and not so tall to middle of the road, which is this rock bass, to really wide-bodied, which are like the bluegill and other members of Lepomis. So like our warmouth and critters like that. There's a lot of species of Lepomis that are here. We just don't talk about any of them. I just gave you a couple representative ones. Remember, the rock bass is the one also known as red eye. So at least in this picture, they do have red eyes. You won't see that in a preserved specimen. It just doesn't stand out very much. So look for one that's kind of a medium-sized body, at least height-wise versus length, and you've got yourself a rock bass. Okay. This one is a stream fish. They can eat things as big as crayfish. They are fished quite often, so they have been introduced into the New River, and they are native to other parts of Virginia. Just so you know that they are here. And like I said, you're just looking for the medium-sized, semi-stocky body that kind of falls halfway between our bass and our bluegill. Our centrarchids is what comes down to. And if we're talking 200 millimeters, that's about 20 centimeters. So it can be as far as like this. Okay, so rock bass are always going to be probably less than a foot long, maybe, what is that, 7 or 8 inches at most. Okay, so hopefully that is helpful enough. This is always the one that is hardest for me to pronounce the genus. Amblopletes rupestris. Good luck with that one. I know, these are hard. You guys are really good for trying. I appreciate it. All right, here's one that's not too bad. It's kind of about the same size and shape as the rock bass, maybe a little taller, but we know what makes this one stand out, and it's the warmouth because it's got the fighting stripes there. Okay, we have seen other species with those stripes. Do you remember the other one? The bowfin is the one that also has the stripes, but remember, bowfins look nothing like this. So if you see the stripes and it's not a bowfin, it's this one. There is one other species, the largemouth bass, that has some weak stripes, but this one, even in preservation, stands out really, really well. Okay, so use that. And it is much more wider bodied than the largemouth bass and the smallmouth bass. Okay, it looks more like a bluegill because they're in the same genus that they're really tall. Okay, they're a little bit bigger than a bluegill generally, but just look for those. Oh, that war paint is kind of how I do it, which is why they call it a warmouth, because it looks like war paint. As I mentioned, it's in the same genus as bluegill, so that's Lepomis gulosus. Okay, so look for the war paint, and really that's the main take home. That should be fairly easy to identify as soon as you see those stripes. Okay, it is more of a species in the eastern part of Virginia, but it has been introduced here. Okay, most of these guys that are in this group are insectivores, but I think really for identification purposes, just looking for that war paint is the way to go. The other member of the genus Lepomis that I'm asking you guys to know should be fairly easy, and that's the bluegill. So remember, we've sort of worked our way down here, and I would say the warmouth might be somewhere between there and here as far as how tall their body is relative to their length. But the bluegill kind of looks like a really big silver dollar or something in my world. But really, just look for that bluegill. Even in preservation, it really stands out. Just look for the bluegill. That's it. Should be easy. Really, really wide body, like tall bodied, short and stocky, bluegill. Okay, and that's another Lepomis. Macrochirus means, I think, big eye. But I'll look that up to be sure. So this one has been introduced kind of as a sport fish. I don't really think they're good eating, but to each his own. They're often stocked in a lot of different places, but just look for that gill that is the operculum that is blue, okay, or black in preserved specimens, okay, and they never get much bigger than like 8 to 10 inches, okay. Lepomis macrochirus. Okay, we get to our bass now. Okay, we start with the smallmouth bass, and those actually, it looks like the smallmouth does have a little bit of vertical striping too. Okay, I think I said it was the largemouth, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the smallmouth that has the one that stands out. But really, this looks nothing like the other ones that do have the horizontal striping. So the bowfin has the horizontal striping. It's got the contiguous, if you recall, dorsal fin with the big spot on it and the rounded tail. This is a sport fish. Okay. The only one you're really going to get it confused with would be largemouth versus smallmouth bass. Okay. It doesn't look like any of the trout because it doesn't have spotting. Okay. These are like blotchy, but not spots. So think trout have some sort of spots, light versus dark spots. Bass may be blotchy. Bass are blotchy. Trouts have spots. Okay. I don't know if that helps, but hopefully it does. Okay. So in this case, the smallmouth, by definition, the mouth does not extend past the eye. And you can see it may extend to the eye or maybe to the middle. You're just sort of looking at all that area, that little flap there. where the jaw kind of stops. Okay, so even if its mouth isn't open, you're just looking at kind of its lips as much as I can get, or its cheeks, I guess, for it, and how far it extends past there. And this one with the small mouth, they're just sort of blotchy. They have no other lines going through their body. That's another way to tell it apart from largemouth bass. Largemouth bass are going to have a long horizontal line of dots going across the midsection of its body. Smallmouth do not have that. Okay, I hope you remember that. Smallmouth do not have a line of spots like largemouth do. And then their mouth does not go past the eye. Right, so that's Micropterus dolomieu. That's a really weird one. But this is going to be a lake fish. It's going to be stocked quite often, and it's not native to at least most of Virginia. Yeah, it looks like it's native to the Mississippi River drainage only, but it's everywhere because it's been stocked everywhere. And they continue to stock it everywhere. Okay, so I think I've talked about all the different things to look for. They're going to be in shallow waters, and both large and smallmouth bass during the summer season will actually sweep out a little crevice with their tail and will defend it from other males, and then females just kind of go from one indentation to another and will lay eggs in different males' nests. It's kind of cool, actually, to see those. But anyway, smallmouth bass. Here's our largemouth. And as I mentioned, you're looking for that long straight line going across the midsection of its body. They also have really weak lines, but not so great. Okay, but you can definitely see that the cheek area goes past where the eye stops. So that's the way to split it up from small to large, but also just look for the series of dots. That's another very easy defining feature. If you can't open the mouth, look for the series of dots. Even when the fish are this big, it'll still have the line of dots. So this is Micropterus salmoides. All right. It's also been introduced. Think of all the sport fish. Nearly all the sport fish have been introduced into where they are. Okay, this is a lake fish, pretty easy. Another top predator. They guard the nests, and they're about the same size as the smallmouth. Okay, so it's supposed to have 3 horizontal dark green bars on the cheek. That's what I had mentioned earlier, with both small and large. I don't really use those as determining features for how to figure out what they are, just because I just don't see them well, and I don't see them preserved really well. Okay, the ones that do have bars that are really obvious, as I mentioned, are the bowfin and the warmouth. These guys, if they have them, are both really weak. Okay, and think about these guys. They've got very elongated bodies, and they tend to be very large as adults. So Micropterus salmoides, we've got that covered. And then we've got just 2 little guys, I think, and a yellow perch left. So not too bad. Fantail darter, little guy, like 2-3 inches maybe. And we went over this the other day. They've got sort of weak tiger stripes, very, very weak. But what stands out are the dots, the series of fanned out dots on their tail. It just looks like kind of stripes of dots that you can see. Even in preserved specimens, that stands out more than anything else. The only thing you're going to get confused with this is the shield darter, because they're both about the same size and the same body shape. You'll also notice they have very rounded pectoral fins, but their head is not abnormally large like the sculpin is. Okay, so they have rounded pectoral fins. They're both small, but the sculpin's got a big head, little body. These guys are pretty streamlined. Okay, so darters are also kind of along the bottom, and they're also a stream fish. And just look for the series of dots on the tail here. and the very, very weak tiger striping. Okay, we'll show how that's different a little bit later. So this is Ethiostoma flabelleri, and the flabelleri has to do with the fan tail. Okay, so this is one that is kind of everywhere. We have found it in I always forget, Connolly's Run in Wildwood Park. Okay, so this is something that is in the feeder streams to the New River. It's also in the New River, and there are more bottom feeders, and they'll eat invertebrates just like everything else does, it seems like. Okay. The yellow perch is one of our bigger guys. It's elongated, and no matter when you see these, they're the only ones with really obvious tiger stripes. Okay, so a bigger fish, I think the ones we have are maybe 6 to 8 inches tall, about 6 to 8 inches tall, long, okay, that we have in our collection, and they have very visible tiger stripes. All right, so that's what you're looking for, is what looks like maybe a sport fish. They also kind of have a small head that just erupts into a larger, taller body. You can see that more pronounced on that lower picture, where it starts with a small head, but then it, boom, leaps up to become a bigger fish. That's kind of what stands out to me, but just look for the tiger stripes. Tiger stripes are the way to go. Nothing else has those tiger stripes that prominent and that are larger fish. Okay, so that's Perca flavescens. Flavescens is in reference to the yellow. All right, this is a coastal species, but it's yet another sport fish, so it's been introduced also into the New River. They can live just about everywhere, it seems like. Creeks, ponds, lakes, all of those things. And they, like I said, they can get to 6 to 8 inches, maybe as big as 12, but I think 12 is kind of uncommon. Just look for the tiger stripes. Perca flavescens. All right, and our last one, I believe, is the shield darter. This is the other darter. Remember, it's only a couple inches long. You separate this out from the fantail because the spotting on its tail is not as obvious, and it's got clear squares on its, even on the preserved specimen. It's got squares instead of just blotching, instead of just lines. It's got visible squares on its body. Let's go back to the fantail darter, just so you can see no squares. Where you've got a little bit of loose striping that's not so visible, but has a really, really striped tail with the fan part of it. Okay. Also notice it's got a rounded tail. This guy has a forked tail. Okay, that's another way to give it away, is look for the squares, not just light striping. You can sometimes see that dorsal line there that kind of moves around along the dorsal side. That kind of stands out a little bit, but I think even in our preserved specimens, the squares are what make it stand out. And this shouldn't be too hard of a one to figure out, because the only one similar is the fantail, and you tell it by the tail difference and by the side blotching. Okay, so Persina peltata is the shield darter. Okay, and basically they're going to be a little bit bigger than the fantail, maybe by an inch or so. This is a native. It's found here. I've never caught it before, but I would love to. And it's a stream species, little guy in streams. Okay, so look for those big squares along the side. Look for a forked tail and maybe less splotching or less lines of dots that the fantail has. Those are the only two that would be confused. All right, do we know it all? You're going to watch this 1,000 times. I hope I won't haunt you in your sleep if you fall asleep listening to this, but I hope this really helps. And yeah, good luck. Keep studying.